3 years of silence. 3 years of pain. He thought the girl he found in the forest was just another lost soul, someone to protect, someone to heal. But what he didn't know was that the shadows following her weren't done yet. And when they came, they didn't just threaten her. They threatened everything he thought he could protect. Watch closely as two broken souls face the darkness chasing them, and discover how trust, loyalty, and courage can forge a bond stronger than fear. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let the story unfold. Nobody tells you what silence does to a man. Not the kind you get in church or on a quiet morning when the dew still hangs in the grass. I'm talking about the silence that stretches across miles of empty land, the kind that settles deep into your bones until you forget the sound of your own voice. That's the silence I'd been living with for years. A silence that started after the fire, after the graves, after the last piece of me worth saving turned to ash. Out here, on the far edge of nowhere, I thought I'd finally managed to bury everything that once made me human. The cabin I built wasn't much. 4 walls, a roof that complained when the rain came heavy, and a porch where I could sit and watch the horizon burn with every sunset. That was all I needed. The world didn't come looking for me, and I sure as hell didn't go looking for it. I mended fences, patched saddles, cut wood, and when I lay down at night, I let the dark swallow me whole. There was nothing left to pray for. Nothing left to lose. Or so I thought. The day it happened was hotter than most. The air burned against the skin, dry and cruel, the kind of heat that makes even the wind feel sharp. I was riding the edge of the treeline, checking traps, when my horse stopped dead. Ears back, nostrils flaring. That animal had carried me through blizzards and storms, but I'd never seen it spook like that. I followed its gaze, squinting into the shadows. At first, it looked like nothing, just a heap of rags tossed in the dirt. Could have been old blankets, could have been trash. But there was something about it that set my teeth on edge. Something wrong. I dismounted, one hand on the revolver at my hip, and walked closer. The smell hit before anything else. Blood, sweat, and rot cooked under the sun. Then the heap twitched. A small sound slipped out, broken, fragile, like it didn't belong to anything alive. I crouched down, heart hammering harder than I'd admit, and pulled at the corner of the rags. That's when I saw her. She wasn't much more than a girl. Barely grown, though the world had beaten the youth out of her face. Her skin was crusted with dirt, her lips split, one eye swollen shut. Bones pressed sharp against her skin as if she'd been starved for months. And yet she was still breathing, shallow and stubborn. She flinched when the light touched her, whispering words that barely carried. Please don't touch me. I could have walked away right then. Nobody would have known, and truth be told, I'd built a life out of staying out of other people's business. I didn't need trouble, and she was trouble from the second I laid eyes on her. But something in me, something I thought had been buried with my family, kept me there. My hands didn't reach for the gun. Instead, I pulled off my coat, heavy with dust and sweat, and wrapped it around her. She didn't fight. Didn't cry. Just sagged against me, a broken thing too tired to resist. The ride back to the cabin was long and quiet. The only sound was the creak of leather and the caw of a crow somewhere far off. I didn't ask her name. Didn't ask who had done this. I figured if she wanted me to know, she'd tell me. Until then, silence was safer. I laid her down in the back room, the one that used to smell like biscuits and lavender, before it turned to dust and years. I lit a lantern, left food and water on the table, and closed the door soft. That first night, she didn't move. By morning, the food was untouched, the water barely sipped. Second night, the same. On the third morning, I noticed the smallest change. The water glass had shifted, a swallow missing. It wasn't much, but it was life. I wasn't good with words anymore. Didn't know how to soothe or comfort. So instead, I dug out my old harmonica. I hadn't touched it since my boy was small. I played low, soft, just a few notes to break the graveyard quiet. She didn't stir at first, but after a while, her breathing evened out. Her eyes closed for the first time since I found her. And when I finished, I swore I saw her hand twitch, just slightly, like maybe she remembered what it felt like to be human. That was the beginning. Not much, just a spark. But sparks have a way of starting fires, whether you mean for them or not. I never asked her name. Days passed, and still I didn't know who she was, or where she had come from, or why the world had decided to chew her up and leave her half dead in the dirt. I only knew that every time I stepped into that back room, she was awake, staring at the ceiling like she was waiting for it to collapse. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, wouldn't move except to clutch that old blanket tighter around herself, as if the thin layer of fabric could hold back whatever had broken her. I'd lived long enough with my own ghosts to recognize hers. They sat heavy on her shoulders, pressed down on her chest until even breathing seemed like labor. I didn't push her. Didn't ask questions. I just left food where she could reach it, filled the water, and kept the door open a crack so the lantern light spilled across the floor. Sometimes at night, I'd sit on the other side of that door, harmonica in hand, playing soft tunes that reminded me of my boys' laughter. I never looked in. She never looked out. But I could tell by the rhythm of her breathing that she was listening. That was enough. By the end of the first week, she'd eaten half a biscuit and managed a few sips of stew I left cooling on the stove. Small victories, but out here, you learned to take what you could get. I caught her eyes once, just once, when I set down the food. They were wide and sharp, like a cornered animal, but there was something else too. A flicker. Not trust, not yet, but something close enough to keep me trying. It was during those nights, sitting in the dark, that my mind wandered back to my own past. To the fire that had taken everything. To my wife's soft hands, my boy's restless feet pounding across the floorboards. I remembered the smell of lavender soap, the way sunlight used to filter through the curtains on Sunday mornings. I remembered what it felt like to be a man worth something, before grief hollowed me out and left me clinging to silence. Maybe that's why I didn't leave her out there. Maybe I saw in her the same emptiness I carried inside. But something else was stirring too, something I couldn't quite name at the time. Call it instinct, call it experience, but I started noticing things I hadn't before. The first was boot prints in the dirt near the barn. Too big to be mine, too fresh to be old. Then, a week later, I found one of my fence wires cut clean through, like someone had tested the land, marking it as theirs. At first I thought maybe it was kids from town, fooling around. But kids don't leave warnings. One morning, I walked out to find a crow tied by its feet and nailed to my fence post. Its wings spread wide, feathers torn, head hanging limp. I stared at it for a long while, the smell of blood thick in the morning air. Whoever had done this wanted me to know it wasn't an accident. They were sending a message. I didn't tell her. Not then. She was still too fragile, too lost in her own battles. But I saw the way she flinched at every creak of the floorboards, the way her eyes darted to the window whenever the wind carried something strange. She already knew, in some way, that danger was close. Trauma makes you sharp like that. Makes you hear things no one else hears. By the second week, she began to shift. She sat up on her own one morning, wrapped still in the blanket but upright, watching the light crawl across the wall. Her hair was matted, her skin bruised, but there was a strength in the way she held herself now. She didn't thank me, didn't speak. But when I brought in a basin of water, she washed her hands and face. That was the first time I saw her without dirt caked across her skin. Beneath it all, she looked younger than I thought. Too young to be carrying that kind of weight. I never tried to fix her. I wasn't foolish enough to think I could. All I could do was keep the cabin safe, keep the fire warm, keep the rifle loaded. At night, I sat in my chair by the door, eyes on the darkness outside, listening to the sounds of the land. Coyotes howling. Branches cracking. Once, the distinct shuffle of boots on gravel, too far to be a trick of imagination. I loaded the chamber, but whoever it was stayed out of sight. Watching. Waiting. One evening, while the sun bled out across the sky and the world turned to shadow, I heard it, the first sound she'd made in days. A whisper, so low I thought I'd imagined it at first. I turned, careful not to startle her, and saw her sitting by the hearth. Her hands clenched white around the blanket, her eyes fixed on the flames. "They were hunting animals," she said, voice like gravel scraped thin. "But they caught me instead." 7 words. That was all. But it was enough to chill me deeper than any winter storm. I didn't press her. Didn't ask who they were. Didn't ask what they'd done. Her voice carried everything I needed to know. The fear, the pain, the kind of horror that carves scars too deep to heal. I'd seen men do things in war that stripped the soul clean out of them. I'd done things myself I never spoke of. But whatever she'd gone through, it was worse. I could feel it in the way her body trembled, in the way her eyes never left the fire, as if she believed the darkness would devour her if she dared look away. That night, I didn't play the harmonica. Didn't move at all. I just sat by the window with the rifle across my lap, eyes fixed on the ridge where I'd once seen a figure watching the cabin. Hours passed. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. But I knew. We weren't alone anymore. The next morning, I found my dog lying by the porch, foam at his mouth, eyes glazed. Poisoned. My stomach turned cold. Whoever was out there wasn't content to watch. They were drawing closer, testing the edges, waiting for the right moment. I buried the dog out back, beside the oak tree where my boy used to swing. She didn't cry when I told her. Didn't even flinch. Just sat in the rocking chair, blanket pulled tight, eyes locked on the horizon. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke again. "They know I'm here." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She already knew what my silence meant. That day, I cleaned the rifle, sharpened the axe, and set traps along the treeline. I rode into the nearest town and spoke to the sheriff, an old war buddy who knew better than to ask too many questions. He put out word, but we both knew the truth. Law moved too slow out here. If these men were coming, it would be me and her standing against them, not a badge and a warrant. That night, I built the fire higher than usual, moved her bed closer to the hearth, and sat in my chair with the rifle across my knees. She didn't sleep. Neither did I. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. Heavy, sharp, like the air before a storm breaks. And I knew, deep down, that the storm was coming. Nights in the wilderness have their own language. You start to hear it when you've been alone long enough. The coyotes trade calls across the ridges, owls cut through the silence with low warnings, and the wind carries secrets in the grass. But that night, none of it spoke. The air hung still, the fire snapped too loud, and every creak of the old cabin sounded like a shout in a church. That's how I knew they were out there. I didn't see them at first. Just shadows moving at the edge of vision, the faint impression of figures standing too far to make out, always gone when I stepped outside with my rifle. But I felt it, the same way you feel a storm before it breaks. The land itself was holding its breath. She must have felt it too. The girl, though she wasn't just a girl anymore, not in the way she carried herself, stayed close to the hearth. She didn't speak much, but her silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of someone waiting to die. It was the silence of someone listening, bracing. Every night, her eyes followed me as I checked the windows, loaded the rifle, stoked the fire. She was learning the rhythm of survival. By the third night, I caught the first undeniable sign. Hoof prints in the dirt, fresh and heavy, circling the cabin. Too many for one rider. Maybe 3, maybe 4. My stomach twisted cold. These weren't drifters passing through. They were circling. Testing. I spent the next morning working harder than I had in years. Reinforced the shutters with planks, laid traps around the barn, dug out the shotgun from its hiding place under the floorboards. She watched me from the doorway, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Her face was pale, her lips drawn tight, but she didn't ask questions. She knew. Later that day, when the sun was bleeding out across the horizon, I saw her standing outside for the first time. Barefoot, hair tangled, eyes fixed on the treeline. She looked like she belonged to the wilderness itself, wild, broken, and stubborn enough to outlast it. When she turned back, our eyes met, and for the first time since I found her, she didn't look past me. She looked at me. I don't know what she saw in my face, but something shifted in hers. She walked back inside without a word, but that night she ate more than half of what I set before her. That was progress. Quiet, fragile progress, but it lit something in me I thought was long dead. Still, the signs of trouble kept piling up. One morning, I found another crow, nailed to the barn door this time. Its wings spread wide like some twisted warning. Another day, I caught the faint smell of smoke on the wind, though nothing burned nearby. And always, those prints. New ones in the dirt, circling, mocking. I tried to hide it from her, but she wasn't blind. Trauma sharpens people. One evening, while I was oiling the rifle, she spoke again. Her voice cracked but steady. They won't stop. You know that. I didn't answer. She didn't need me to. Instead, I handed her the shotgun, heavy in her thin arms. She looked at it like it was a ghost, hands trembling as she held the weight. I showed her how to brace it, how to rest it against her shoulder, how to breathe slow and steady before the pull of the trigger. She listened without protest. She didn't say she was ready. She didn't have to. Out here, you don't get ready. You just fight or die. That night, I kept the lantern low, shadows thick in the corners. I sat by the door, rifle across my lap, while she lay on the cot by the fire. Sleep didn't come for either of us. Every crack outside, every shift of the wind, we both tensed. The silence pressed in heavy, until finally, sometime past midnight, the sound came. Hooves. Slow, deliberate, circling the cabin like wolves testing a fence. My grip tightened on the rifle. She sat up, eyes wide, clutching the shotgun close to her chest. We didn't speak. Didn't move. Just listened as the horses paced, then stopped. The night stretched long, empty, until at last the sound faded into the distance. But I knew better. They weren't leaving. They were waiting. The next morning, I saddled my horse and rode out along the ridge. The land stretched wide, the kind of emptiness that usually swallows secrets. But not this time. I found their camp half a mile north, ashes of a fire still warm, scraps of meat on the ground, boot prints leading deeper into the trees. They were close. Too close. I didn't ride further. Didn't need to. The message was clear enough. They wanted me to know they were here. They wanted her to fear. When I returned, she was standing on the porch, shotgun in hand, barefoot in the dust. She looked smaller than ever, wrapped in that blanket, but the way she gripped the weapon told me she'd made her choice. Whatever hunted her wasn't going to take her easy. That night, I played the harmonica again. The notes were low, rough, a song older than both of us. She sat by the fire, listening. For the first time, I saw her shoulders ease, just slightly, like the music carried her somewhere else, somewhere before the horror. Her eyes closed, and though her hands still clenched the blanket, her breathing softened. I kept playing long after the notes should have ended. Long after the fire burned low. Because I knew, when the music stopped, the darkness would rush back in, and with it, the truth we both carried. They weren't watching anymore. They were coming. And when they did, this land would turn red before the dawn. The land doesn't lie. It never has. A man can fool himself, pretend he's safe, pretend the danger's far away, but the dirt and the wind, the silence between the trees, they always tell the truth. And that truth came heavy the night I heard the first knock on the cabin wall. Not a polite knock. Not the kind you answer. This one was slow, deliberate, the flat of a hand against the wood. 3 times. Then silence. She froze by the fire, eyes wide, shotgun clutched so tight her knuckles went white. I raised a hand, told her without words to stay put, and moved toward the door with the rifle low. My breath was steady, but my heart hammered like a drum. When I pulled the door open, there was nothing. Just the dark stretch of night, the whisper of wind through the grass. But I wasn't fooled. I stepped out onto the porch, every board groaning under my boots, and scanned the treeline. A shape flickered there, too quick, too far to make out. A man, maybe. Or the shadow of one. When I lifted the rifle, the figure was gone. That was how it began. From then on, the nights bled together in a haze of waiting. Hooves circling. Rocks thrown against the cabin walls. Once, a window shattered, glass spilling across the floorboards. Each time, by the time I stepped out with my rifle, they were gone. Ghosts with boots and cruel patience. She changed during those nights. The girl I'd carried half dead from the dirt began to sit straighter, her eyes sharper, her silence heavier with resolve. She spent hours with the shotgun across her lap, watching the door. I showed her how to clean it, how to load it without fumbling, how to rest her breathing so her hands wouldn't shake when the moment came. She listened, never complained, never asked why. She already knew why. But the truth is, no lesson prepares you for the moment the world bursts in on you. It was just after sunset when it finally happened. The sky still glowed orange at the edges, but the shadows were thick, bold, pressing close. I was splitting kindling out back when I heard it. Hooves, not circling this time but advancing, steady and slow. 3 of them. Maybe 4. My hands tightened around the axe handle as the horses crested the ridge. 3 men. Dusty coats, wide hats pulled low, rifles slung at their sides. They didn't rush. Didn't shout. Just rode down into the clearing like they owned the land, like they'd been here 100 times before. My stomach twisted cold. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was a claim. I stepped out from behind the shed, axe still in my grip. They saw me, but their eyes slid past, to the cabin, to the glow of the fire through the window where she sat. The one in the middle, taller than the rest, face half covered by a rag, spat into the dirt and pointed. "We're here for what's ours." The words carried across the silence, heavy as a gunshot. My hand tightened on the axe. My mouth stayed shut. Talking wasn't going to change what was coming. Inside the cabin, I knew she'd heard. The firelight flickered across the window, and I saw the shape of her moving, the faint outline of the shotgun in her hands. The riders dismounted, boots crunching against the dirt. 3 men, 3 sets of eyes mean and hungry, walking toward the porch without hurry, without fear. That told me everything I needed to know. They'd done this before. Too many times. I didn't wait for them to reach the steps. I moved fast, rifle raised, firing a warning shot into the dirt at their feet. The sound cracked the air open, sent the horses snorting and bolting back. But the men didn't flinch. They just smiled. The one in the rag mask tilted his head. "You can't keep her. She's marked." Marked. The word cut deeper than the bullet. I almost fired next. Whatever they'd done to her, whatever she'd been through, it wasn't chance. She hadn't just been prey, they'd chosen her. Hunted her. And they weren't planning to stop. The second man stepped forward, hand resting lazy on the butt of his pistol. "Step aside, old man. You don't want to get buried out here with her." Old man. Funny how death never forgets to mock you before it comes. I didn't answer. Just shifted the rifle, aimed higher this time. My silence spoke for me. That's when everything shattered. The door burst open behind me, wood cracking against the wall. She stood there, blanket gone, shotgun braced against her shoulder just like I'd shown her. She didn't scream. Didn't cry. Just fired. The blast tore through the closest rider, dropped him before he even cleared his pistol. His body hit the dirt with a sound I'll never forget. The others froze, shocked by the sudden violence. That was all the time I needed. I came in from the side, swung the axe with every ounce of rage I'd buried in the years since the fire. The blade buried deep in the gut of the second man. His scream was high, wild, cut short as he collapsed. The third spun to run, hand fumbling for his rifle, but he never got the chance. My revolver barked once, clean, and he went down clutching his leg, screaming like a trapped coyote. The clearing filled with smoke, the smell of blood and gunpowder thick in the air. My ears rang, my breath came ragged, but when the dust cleared, it was done. One man dead, one dying, one writhing in the dirt. I tied the last one up, dragged him behind the cabin, his curses spilling into the night. She stood in the doorway, shotgun still clutched, chest heaving, eyes wide. For the first time, I saw fire in them. Not fear. Not despair. Fire. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. By dawn, I rode into town with the bodies. The sheriff didn't ask questions. He just nodded, jaw tight, and took them off my hands. Word spread fast, though. By the time I returned to the cabin, I knew every outlaw within 100 miles would know too. And if 3 came, more would follow. But when I stepped back onto that porch, saw her sitting in the rocking chair, hair tangled, face pale but alive, shotgun resting across her lap like it belonged there, I knew one thing for certain. They thought they'd find prey. Instead, they'd found a fight. The bodies didn't stay buried long, not in a land like this. Out here, the desert wind and the vultures see to it that nothing remains hidden. But it wasn't the carrion birds that worried me. It was the kind of men who'd come searching once word spread that 3 of their own hadn't returned. By the second sunrise after the fight, I already felt it. The weight of eyes that weren't there, the hush in the trees, the silence of the canyon trails. The land itself had gone tense, waiting. She noticed too. I'd stepped out early that morning to chop more wood when I saw her on the porch. The rocking chair creaked beneath her, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, shotgun across her knees. She wasn't half asleep like before. She wasn't shivering or shrinking into herself. Her eyes were steady on the horizon, watching the trail the way I used to. "You're expecting them," I said, voice rough from the cold air. She didn't flinch. "Aren't you?" The words landed hard. She wasn't wrong. That day passed slow, thick with waiting. Every sound carried weight. The crack of branches, the caw of a crow, the distant echo of hooves that never came close. My hands itched for work just to keep my mind from circling the same dark thoughts, so I put her to tasks she'd never done before. I showed her how to set traps in the treeline, how to lay wire between posts so no one could rush the cabin unseen. She followed my steps with quiet precision, asking no questions, wasting no motion. Later, we carried buckets down to the creek, filled them with water, and set them by the cabin walls. "For fire?" she asked, finally. I nodded. "They'll use it if they can't take us with bullets." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. She knew what I meant. These men didn't come just to kill, they came to erase. To burn away the very memory of whoever stood against them. By evening, the wind shifted, carrying with it a smell I hadn't breathed in years. Horses. Too many of them. I stiffened where I stood by the chopping block, axe frozen mid-swing. She was on the porch again, and I saw her body tense the same moment I caught the scent. Her eyes met mine, and there was no mistaking it. We both knew what it meant. "They'll come tonight," I said. Her grip tightened on the shotgun, but she didn't speak. Her silence was answer enough. Night fell heavy and fast, swallowing the horizon in black. We doused the fire, let the cabin sink into shadows, and waited. I'd set the rifle by the window, revolver on my hip, knife at my belt. Every breath was measured, quiet. Even the old wood of the cabin seemed to hold its voice, as though it knew making a sound would draw death closer. Hours passed. The silence stretched thin. Then, just as my eyelids began to ache with strain, I heard it. Hooves. Not circling this time, not taunting. Advancing. Steady, deliberate. Too many to count. She tensed beside me, shotgun braced, her lips pressed tight. My hand went to her arm, squeezing once. Not to comfort. Just to remind her, steady. Through the cracks of the window, I saw them come. Lanterns swinging from saddles, their glow cutting through the dark. Shadows of men on horseback, rifles slung, bandanas covering faces. 6, 8, maybe more. They stopped just outside the treeline, the glow of their lanterns dancing against the bark. Then came the voice. Deep, cruel, certain. You killed 3 of mine. It rolled across the night like thunder. A leader's voice. A man who'd tasted blood before and meant to taste it again. You think you can hole up here, live quiet, keep what isn't yours? This land, don't forget. Neither do we. I felt her shift beside me, the sharp inhale of breath through clenched teeth. My own chest tightened, anger crawling up my throat. But I didn't answer. Not yet. The silence stretched, broken only by the restless stamping of horses. Then the man spoke again. We'll take her back. You can die clean, or you can die slow. Your choice. Her grip on the shotgun trembled, just once. My hand caught hers, steadying it. I leaned close, whispered so low only she could hear. They don't know you anymore. Not the way they think. Let them come and see. The first gunshot split the night before I even finished speaking. A bullet shattered the window beside us, spraying glass across the floorboards. She gasped, ducked low, but her finger never left the trigger. I swung the rifle up, sighted through the jagged hole, and fired back. A rider fell from his horse with a scream, lantern tumbling into the dirt. Chaos erupted. Horses reared, men shouted, bullets tore through the night. The cabin walls shook with the impact of lead. Smoke choked the air. She fired next, blast from the shotgun echoing through the room. Another cry, another man down. She didn't stop to watch, just racked the gun, braced again, ready. The fire in her eyes burned hotter than the lantern light. They tried rushing the porch, shadows darting between the trees, but the traps I'd laid caught them. A scream rang out as one rider's leg snapped in the wire. Another stumbled into a pit, his rifle flying from his hands. Still, there were too many. I reloaded fast, the rhythm of war I hadn't known in years flooding back through my veins. But even as I shot, even as I swung the axe when they came too close, I knew the truth. This wasn't the battle. This was only the beginning. They'd keep coming until the cabin was ash, until she was gone, until I was buried. And yet, through the smoke and the screams, through the blood and the thunder of rifles, one thought cut sharper than the rest. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were fighting back. By dawn, the ground outside the cabin was littered with bodies. Not all of them theirs. 2 of my traps were broken, my shoulder burned from a graze, and my hands shook with exhaustion. She was slumped against the wall, hair tangled, face streaked with soot, but she was alive. Alive, and holding the shotgun still as though it had fused to her hands. The survivors didn't stay. When the sun crested the ridge, painting the blood-soaked dirt in gold, the riders left. Not in defeat. In warning. The leader had been among them. I'd seen his shape in the trees, tall, broad, a coat that dragged against the ground. He hadn't fought. Not yet. He'd just watched. And as they rode away, his voice carried across the silence. This ain't over. We'll take her back. And when we do, you'll beg for the fire. Then they were gone, leaving only the stench of blood and smoke behind. Inside the cabin, I lowered myself onto the chair opposite her. My body screamed with pain, my chest heavy with loss I hadn't even named yet. But when I looked at her, I saw something that startled me more than the fight itself. She wasn't broken. Her eyes, though ringed with exhaustion, were clear, fierce. And for the first time since I'd pulled her half dead from the dirt, she spoke more than a handful of words. I'm not going back. Not to them. Not ever. Her voice was steady, final, a vow carved into stone. I met her eyes, felt the fire there, and for the first time in years I believed maybe, just maybe, there was something left worth bleeding for. The cabin smelled of blood, smoke, and splintered wood. The air inside was heavy, clinging to the lungs as though it meant to choke us. Morning light seeped through the broken shutters, painting thin lines of gold across the floor where shell casings glinted like old coins. She sat slouched against the wall, hair tangled, hands still gripping the shotgun. I wondered if she even realized she hadn't let it go. Her knuckles were raw, skin split where the wood had bitten into her. You need to rest, I said. My voice rasped low, worn down by smoke and silence alike. Her eyes lifted, heavy but sharp. If I close my eyes, they'll be here again. They will, I admitted. But not today. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slow and deliberate, she set the shotgun down beside her. The sound of it touching the floor was small, almost delicate, yet it felt like thunder rolling through the cabin. The hours after battle are stranger than the battle itself. Noise replaced by silence. Fear replaced by exhaustion. The hands, once so quick to fight, shake with tasks as simple as bandaging wounds. I tore strips of cloth, wrapped the graze along my shoulder, cleaned the blood from my side. She tried to help, her hands clumsy at first, but steadier as I guided her. I felt her touch linger, not gentle but determined. It struck me harder than the bullet had. "You've done this before," I said quietly. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away. "Not like this. Never for someone else." I didn't ask what she meant. Some answers cut deeper than wounds. We buried the dead in silence. Not all of them, there were too many, but enough that the land wouldn't smell of rot when the sun burned high. She carried tools without complaint, her shoulders straight, her face unreadable. I'd seen men crumble after killing one. She'd shot 2 last night, maybe 3, and yet here she was, digging, working, standing. When it was done, I set 3 stones upright by the tree-lean. Not for them. For me. Markers. Warnings. Proof that the ground here had already drunk blood, and would again. She stood beside me, gaze steady on the stones. "They'll come back," she said. I nodded. "They will." Her jaw tightened. Good. The days that followed blurred together. We worked from dawn until exhaustion took us. Repaired the shutters, reinforced the doors, dug trenches by the creek. I taught her how to load the rifle, how to line her breath with the rhythm of the trigger. She listened. Learned. Her hands steadied. Her eyes sharpened. One evening, as the sun sank in fire across the horizon, I caught her practicing alone. Rifle braced on the porch rail, jaw tight, eyes narrowing down the sights. She fired, the crack rolling through the valley. The tin can I'd set on a fence post flew into the dirt. She didn't smile, but she fired again. And again. Each shot truer than the last. When I stepped closer, she didn't lower the gun. Just said, almost to herself, "I don't want to feel helpless ever again." But the nights were harder. Sleep never came easy, not with the memory of their voices still crawling through the dark. Some nights I'd hear her stir, muttering, twisting against the blanket. Once, I found her on the porch at dawn, barefoot, staring at the horizon with tears drying on her cheeks. She didn't speak of it, and I didn't force her to. But in those moments, I saw the fracture beneath her fire, the wound that no rifle or trap could heal. Still, something was changing. The change came sharpest the day we hunted. Supplies were low, and the smoke of battle had driven game from the valley. We tracked deer into the higher ridge, the ground rough, the air thin. She followed behind me, steps quiet, shoulders squared. When the moment came, when the stag lifted its head from the stream, I handed her the rifle. Her breath shivered once, then stilled. The shot rang. The stag fell. She exhaled, eyes wide, chest heaving. Not from fear. From the weight of choice. I watched her kneel by the fallen animal, fingers trembling as she touched its hide. She whispered something, too soft for me to hear. A prayer, maybe. Or an apology. When she looked up, there was no hesitation left. Only resolve. That night, over the fire, I asked her the question that had gnawed at me since the first bullet shattered our window. Why were they hunting you? The flames cracked, wood falling into embers. Her face was half lit, half shadow, and her silence stretched long. Finally, she said, "Because I was theirs. And I ran." The words landed heavy, and the silence after them heavier still. I didn't push. I didn't ask what theirs meant, or what running had cost her. But I understood enough. A woman doesn't carry fire in her eyes unless she's been burned before. The days wore on. Weeks, maybe. The land blurred time. But the sense of waiting only grew sharper. Birds moved differently. The trees whispered with unease. Even the creek seemed to run heavier, as if bracing for what was coming. And then, one evening, as the horizon bled red with sunset, I saw it. Smoke. Not the thin line of a campfire. A column. Thick. Rising from the ridge 2 valleys over. She saw it too. Her face hardened, no fear this time, just certainty. "They've found others," she whispered. I lowered the rifle, jaw tight. Or they're burning what's left behind. Either way, it meant the same thing. They were closer. That night, as we sat in silence by the dead fire, she broke it with words I hadn't expected. "If I die here, I want it to mean something." I turned to her, startled by the calm in her tone. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't surrendering. She was deciding. "You won't die here," I said. Her gaze held mine, steady, unflinching. "Then fight with me. Not for me. With me." The fire in her eyes burned brighter than the flames ever had. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe in years. I wasn't alone anymore. The ridge carried sound differently at night. Every creak of a branch, every stone sliding underfoot echoed like whispers in the dark. I'd grown used to those whispers, knew how to separate the harmless from the warning. But that night, the air carried something else. A weight. A rhythm. The faint, uneven beat of horses on distant ground. "They're moving," I said, my voice low. She tightened the strap on her rifle, eyes scanning the dark ridge. Her breath came slow, but not weak. It was the breath of someone who had already accepted what was coming. The following morning, we found tracks. Heavy. Fresh. Dozens of boots, more than a handful of horses. They cut across the northern trail, sharp and deliberate, leaving no doubt, they weren't hunting blindly anymore. They were closing in. I crouched, tracing the edges of a hoofprint with my fingers. "They've got a wagon with them. Supplies. Maybe more weapons." She stood above me, jaw tight. And a leader. The way she said it carried more than suspicion, it carried memory. She knew him, whoever he was. Or at least, she knew the kind of man who could drive others this far. By midday, smoke rose again. Not a thin trail. Another column, thicker, darker than the last. A village, burning. She stopped dead when she saw it, her hands curling into fists. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the fire within. "They're clearing everything. Wiping the land clean." "Why?" I asked. She shook her head. "Because they can. Because it sends a message." And then, almost too quietly, "Because he wants me afraid." The way she said he told me everything I needed. This wasn't a faceless enemy. This was personal. We doubled our work that day. Reinforced traps. Dug new ditches by the creek. Stockpiled wood, water, powder. Each task done in silence, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of unspoken promises. At dusk, as we carried the last logs to the cabin, a sound split the valley. Not the wind. Not thunder. A horn. Low. Distant. Measured. She froze, breath sharp. "That's him." The horn echoed again, long and drawn. A call not just to his men, but to us. A warning, or a challenge. "They know we're here," I muttered. She didn't flinch. Good. That night, she told me more than she ever had. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "He calls himself the Warden. He wasn't born to it. Took it. Stole it. Built it out of blood. His law is simple. You're his, or you're nothing. I was nothing, until I wasn't. He wanted me for what I could do, not who I was. And when I left," her voice cracked, "just once. He made sure I'd pay for it." The firelight flickered across her face, shadowing her eyes. And for the first time, I understood the depth of the storm inside her. This wasn't survival anymore. It was reckoning. The following days felt like the valley itself held its breath. No birdsong. No deer by the stream. Only silence, and the faint hum of something approaching. On the third morning, we saw them. Far across the ridge, black dots moved against the rising sun. Horses. Men. A line of them, cutting through the valley like a scar. At the center, a wagon rolled heavy. And ahead of it, a rider cloaked in dark leather, his posture sharp as iron. Even at that distance I knew. That was him. The warden. She saw him too. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle, though he was far beyond reach. Her breath hitched, but not from fear. From fury. We watched them for hours as they set camp near the edge of the forest. Organized. Disciplined. Not wild raiders. Soldiers. Trained, loyal to him, bound by whatever fear or promise he carried. They'll move at night, I said. She nodded, eyes fixed on the distant campfires. He always does. Her words carried weight. She wasn't guessing. She knew his ways. His rhythm. We prepared for the night like men prepare for storms, knowing it cannot be stopped, only survived. I checked each rifle, sharpened each blade. She filled lanterns, coiled rope, set traps near the treeline. The cabin no longer felt like a shelter, it felt like a fortress. Or a tomb. When darkness fell, we sat in silence, each sound of the forest pressing harder against our ears. The creek's steady rush. The distant crack of wood. And beneath it all, the faintest sound of movement. Slow. Intentional. They're testing us, I whispered. Her hand tightened on the rifle. Then let's give them an answer. The first shadow came at midnight. A man, slipping through the trees, knife gleaming faintly in moonlight. He moved with skill, silent as a predator. But the snare I'd laid caught his ankle, snapping bone with a crack that split the night. His scream was short-lived, the rifle cut it off. The second came minutes later. Another shadow, rushing the porch. But she was ready. The blast of her shotgun flung him back into the dirt, his body twisting in silence. Then, silence again. Too much silence. We waited. Hearts pounding. Fingers steady on triggers. Then came the horn. Not distant this time. Close. Deafening. A call to strike. The forest erupted. Shadows poured forward, torches flickering, steel flashing. A dozen men, maybe more, their war cries splitting the night. I fired first, dropping one before he reached the fence. She fired next, tearing through another. The air filled with smoke and screams, wood splintering as bullets tore into the cabin walls. They pressed hard, relentless. But the traps held. Pits swallowed legs. Barbed wires ripped flesh. The land fought with us, each step forward costing them blood. Still, they kept coming. Through the chaos, one figure never moved. At the edge of the treeline, the warden sat atop his horse, watching. Not rushing. Not striking. Just watching. Judging. The attack broke after what felt like hours, though it could have been minutes. The ground outside was littered with bodies, torches flickering weakly in the dirt. The forest fell silent once more. But he was still there. The warden. He raised a hand, and the horn sounded again, short, sharp. A command to withdraw. His men pulled back, vanishing into the trees like smoke on the wind. He lingered a moment longer, his face unreadable in the distance. Then, without a word, he turned his horse and rode into the dark. When silence finally fell, she collapsed against the wall, sweat dripping, eyes blazing with something fierce. "He's not done," she whispered. I nodded, chest heaving. No. That was just the beginning. Her gaze met mine, steady, unshaken. "Then we'll finish it." The night after the attack left a silence heavier than any bullet could. The cabin smelled of gunpowder, sweat, and the faint iron tang of blood. Outside, the forest held its breath, the trees barely moving, almost as if the land itself mourned, or feared, what had passed. She sat on the porch, blanket wrapped tight, shotgun lying across her knees. Her hands trembled, not from cold, not from fear, but from exhaustion, both physical and something deeper. I didn't speak. Didn't need to. Some things don't need words. The quiet says enough. Hours passed. She never moved from that spot, eyes fixed on the ridge where the warden had vanished. I could feel the storm building inside her, the anger, the fear, the old chains snapping, one by one. By sunrise, she was still sitting there, silent, her jaw tight. I brought her water and a small breakfast, which she took without a word. She didn't eat, not really. Her eyes kept drifting toward the horizon, calculating, remembering. I realized then that her fight wasn't just with the men outside. It was with the memories that haunted her, the past she'd run from and the horrors she'd endured. I asked quietly, does it always feel like they're inside you, even when they're not? She didn't flinch. Didn't answer immediately. Just stared at the dirt between her boots, tracing patterns with her finger. After a long pause, she whispered, they never left. Not really. Every shadow, every whisper, every night, I feel them. And him. Always him. Her words hit harder than any bullet. I'd never known anyone to carry fear and fire in the same breath. She wasn't broken. She was a storm contained within a fragile frame. Over the next days, we worked in silence. The cabin became a fortress, the forest our ally. She learned the traps faster than I expected, moving like she'd been born for survival. Her precision, her timing, it was uncanny. But there were moments when I caught her staring off into the distance, hands frozen mid-task, eyes wide, mouth tight. Shadows of memory clawing at her. One night, I found her on the porch again. Rain had begun, a steady drizzle soaking the cabin roof, dripping down the windows. She hadn't moved since sunset. I joined her quietly, sitting beside her. They'll come back, I said. She nodded, voice low. And they won't stop until I'm theirs again. I placed a hand on her shoulder, rough, calloused. Then we'll stop them. Her eyes found mine, and for the first time, a faint spark of trust crossed the shadow of pain in them. Not for me, she said. With me. The next morning brought word from the ridge. Tracks fresh. Too many to ignore. Scouts, or the warden himself. She inspected the prints, her fingers brushing the dirt as though memorizing every contour. They've learned our layout, she muttered. They'll move differently next time. Stealth. Speed. Coordination. I nodded. Then we adapt. She didn't argue. Her face was set, expression hard. But when she picked up the rifle and loaded it, I noticed the tremor in her hand had lessened. She was sharpening herself, refining the storm inside her. At midday, she spoke again. Her voice was quieter, almost hesitant. I've been thinking about the first time they took me. About him. About why he does what he does. I waited, watching her closely. He's not cruel for cruelty's sake, she continued. He's cruelty as control. Every life he touches, every fear he plants, it's a chain. And he wants me in it because he can't stand the thought of someone breaking free. Her words chilled me, but I saw something else behind them. Not fear. Determination. Understanding. She wasn't just preparing to survive, she was preparing to dismantle the man who had haunted her for years. The nights that followed were restless. Every sound, a snapping twig, a rustle in the leaves, made her flinch, made me tighten my grip on the rifle. Yet, in the quiet moments, we began to talk, slowly. Not about the past. Not about them. About the land, about small things. The creek, the trees, the way light falls on the cabin in the early morning. And yet, always circling back, unspoken, the storm waited. On the fifth night, I woke to find her gone from the cabin. Panic surged first. But then I heard the soft splash of water from the creek. I followed, finding her kneeling on the bank, fingers trailing in the stream. Her reflection wavered with the ripples. They'll be here soon, I said. She nodded. I know. I can feel it in the land. The same way I could feel the fear in their eyes when I ran the first time. You're ready, I said. She looked at me, eyes blazing. I'm not ready to die. But I'm ready to make him remember fear. Her words struck harder than the first bullet had ever done. She had transformed, from the frightened girl in the dirt to a woman forged in blood and fire, sharpened by trauma but tempered by her own resolve. By the 7th day, we had fortified every entrance, double-checked every trap, and memorized every approach through the forest. Each of us carried our own scars, visible and invisible. But we were no longer just two survivors, we were a force, silent, patient, deadly. And all the while, the horizon waited. Smoke still rose from distant ridges, the warden's presence a constant shadow over the valley. His menace was tangible, an unseen weight pressing against every heartbeat. The storm was coming. Not just the men, not just the rifles or torches. The storm was him. And for the first time, I realized that this wasn't only about survival anymore. It wasn't only about protecting each other. It was about facing the ghost that had haunted her for years, the man who thought control meant power, and proving that some chains could be broken. We weren't just waiting. We were preparing. And when the warden came, he would find something he hadn't anticipated. 2 broken souls, yes, but fused into something unyielding. Something he could not control. The night was thick with smoke and tension, the air itself seeming to press down on the cabin. Every shadow moved with intent, every sound was a warning. I had barely slept, fingers sore from polishing rifles and checking traps, but sleep wasn't an option. Not tonight. Not when he was coming. She stood by the back door, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the ridge like a hawk. She didn't speak, just nodded when I approached. That single gesture said more than words ever could. We were ready. It started with the horses. A faint rhythm at first, almost imperceptible against the creek's rush. Then it grew, a slow, deliberate stomp of hooves on dirt and rock. Their formation was perfect, trained men, disciplined, moving as one. I counted at least a dozen. They know every step, I murmured. She didn't reply. Her hand tightened on the rifle. Her jaw set. They'll test the traps first, I continued. We've only got one shot at this. Her eyes met mine, unwavering. Then we make it count. The first wave hit just past midnight. Shadows moved like smoke through the trees. One misstep, and a leg was caught in a trap we'd hidden. His scream tore through the silence, brief and sharp. The next one didn't hesitate. He ran, only to meet the barrel of her shotgun. The blast was deafening in the quiet night, a storm's roar confined to the cabin's walls. I moved beside her, firing at anyone reckless enough to approach. Each shot rang true, each movement precise. She ducked low, rolled to avoid a torch swing, and returned fire without hesitation. Blood and smoke mingled in the air, thick and heavy, but neither of us faltered. Then, from the tree-line, I saw him. The warden. On his horse, face half covered by shadow. He didn't move quickly, didn't charge. He watched. Evaluated. Calculated. The terror and fury in his eyes was almost visible, but it wasn't fear, it was anger. Anger at control slipping through his fingers. She caught sight of him too. Her lips tightened, eyes narrowing. He's waiting for me to break, she muttered under her breath. I didn't speak. Didn't need to. We both knew. He was the storm, and she was the lightning striking back. The skirmish raged for hours. Their numbers pressed, but the traps and our positioning held them at bay. Arrows and bullets tore through the night, the forest echoing with cries and the clatter of falling men. I could feel her beside me, every move synchronized, every breath aligned with mine. We were no longer separate. We were one force, honed by pain, fear, and determination. Yet, through the chaos, he remained untouched. The warden never dismounted. Never engaged directly. He let his men bleed while he watched, commanding with a glance, a gesture. His control was absolute. Until now. One of his men slipped too close. I fired, catching him in the chest. He fell with a scream that echoed like thunder across the ridge. She didn't hesitate. Another lunging figure, another blast from the shotgun. The firelight flickered across her face, illuminating the focus, the fury, the unbroken resolve. I realized then that she was no longer running. No longer a victim. She was the predator, and we were the apex in our domain. Hours passed, though it could have been minutes. Exhaustion clawed at us, but we didn't stop. Every shadow, every movement, every sound demanded attention. Then, finally, the warden made his move. He rode forward, closer than before, eyes locked on her. Not attacking, not yet, but provoking. He wanted her to panic, to falter, to prove that she was still his to control. She didn't flinch, didn't lower her weapon. Her stance was rigid, every muscle coiled like a spring. And then, slowly, deliberately, she raised her rifle. Time slowed. The warden's horse pawed the ground, the man unaware that the balance of power had shifted. She fired, not to kill yet, but to warn. The bullet tore through the dirt at his feet, kicking up a spray of mud. The shock in his eyes was enough. The cabin became a fortress of strategy. We funneled them toward traps. We used the terrain to our advantage. The creek became a moat, fallen trees a barrier. Every move was calculated, every shot deliberate. They had numbers, but we had terrain, traps, and the storm in her eyes. By the final hour, half of his men were incapacitated or retreating. Smoke rose from burning barricades, cries filled the forest, but he still remained, patient, calculating, angry. He was the master of control, and he was losing it. Then, in the silence between chaos, I saw him dismount. Up close now, the warden himself, dark coat soaked with rain, eyes burning with rage. He drew his knife, sleek and deadly, and moved toward her. She didn't wait. Not for me, not for fear, not for hesitation. She fired. The bullet grazed his shoulder, just enough to slow him. Not stop him. But she had him where he was vulnerable. I moved beside her, rifle aimed, heart pounding. This was it. The moment we'd both been preparing for. The final confrontation. Dawn broke over the ridge with a muted, gray light. The night had left the land scarred and silent, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the storm to end. We were still inside the cabin, rifles close, traps checked one last time. She sat near the window, eyes locked on the ridge where he had disappeared after the last skirmish. "They'll come back," I said quietly, though it felt more like stating the obvious than a warning. She didn't move, didn't blink. "Then we'll be ready," she said, voice low, firm. The calm in her tone was terrifying in its clarity. She had become something untouchable, shaped by every fear and every moment of survival. The first sign of him came mid-morning. The warden appeared alone, riding slowly along the ridge. No men this time. No scouts. Just him. The calculated approach of a man who had underestimated what we were capable of. I checked my rifle again. She did the same, methodical, precise. Not a word between us, only the sound of our breath and the distant caw of a crow circling overhead. The valley felt suspended in tension. He dismounted at the edge of the tree lean, boots crunching on wet dirt. Knife gleaming in his hand, eyes sharp, calculating. He smiled, a thin, cruel line, and his gaze swept across the cabin like he owned the world. But he didn't account for the woman beside me. The girl who had been nothing, who had survived hell, who had learned to fight and endure, who had forged herself into something unbreakable. She stepped to the front of the cabin, rifle raised, standing tall and unyielding. "It ends today," she said. He laughed. Low. Dark. A sound meant to intimidate. "You think you can stop me? After all these years, you think you can defy the warden?" She didn't flinch. "I don't think. I know." The first move was his. He lunged, knife aimed for her chest, swift, silent, deadly. But she was ready. Ducking low, rolling to the side, she fired her rifle. The shot grazed his arm, not enough to kill, but enough to stagger. I moved at the same moment, sidearm drawn, keeping the pressure on him. He stumbled back, fury written across his face. Every muscle coiled, ready to strike again. We danced a deadly rhythm across the small clearing. His knife slashed, I fired, she shot, each movement precise, each strike deliberate. This was no longer survival. This was execution, a reckoning for years of terror and pain. He was strong, trained, dangerous. But he was human, and humans bleed. She advanced, slow, measured. Her eyes never left his. Her hands didn't shake. Each step she took was a testament to every moment of suffering she had endured and survived. When she fired again, the bullet hit his shoulder, and he dropped the knife, staggering, stunned. I moved forward, rifle aimed, ready to end it if he recovered. But he didn't recover. Not fully. Not against her. She reached him, standing over his fallen form, and for the first time, the man who had haunted her, who had terrorized countless others, looked small, defeated, mortal. He spat blood into the dirt, glaring up at her. You're just a girl, he hissed. She didn't reply. She just lowered the rifle slightly, the weight of years, fear, and vengeance balanced in her hands. I'm not a girl, she said. I'm what you made me. The irony wasn't lost on me, nor on him. He had spent years shaping fear, shaping control, and in the end, he had forged his own downfall. The fight ended with him unconscious, trapped by one of our final snares. The forest was silent again, heavy with the aftermath, the air thick with smoke, blood, and rain. We didn't celebrate. There was no triumph in the screams of the past, only the quiet satisfaction of survival and justice. She looked at me, finally, fully. Not with fear, not with caution, but with clarity. It's over, she said. I nodded. For now. The land keeps the score. And we made sure it's even. Weeks passed. The valley healed slowly. The cabin returned to a semblance of home. She still didn't speak much, but her presence was enough. We shared routines, small gestures, moments that spoke louder than words. Water from the creek, fresh biscuits, clearing traps, watching the sunset. Trust was no longer tentative. It was solid. Silent, unspoken but absolute. People from the nearest town noticed. They whispered about the woman who had survived the warden, the man who had sheltered her, and the strange, unbreakable bond they shared. Some came seeking tales, some came seeking justice, but all left knowing that out here, in the valley and the forest, the rules were different. The law was slow, but the land remembered. She began helping again. Small steps at first, watering plants, cleaning the cabin, preparing meals. And slowly, she started speaking, not about the past, but about the present, the land, the creek, the skies. Her laughter came back, soft, hesitant, but real. Months later, the warden was nothing more than a shadow in the stories we told. A warning in the valley, a lesson carved into the earth. But the girl, no longer just a survivor, no longer a victim, had become a force. Her presence, quiet yet commanding, had reshaped both of our lives. We never spoke much of the horrors we'd faced. We didn't need to. The land remembered. The scars, physical and invisible, were a testament. And in the quiet moments, as the sun dipped low and the creek whispered across the stones, we shared a simple truth. Survival was not enough. Trust, loyalty, and the willingness to stand together, that was real power. She finally looked at me fully one evening, hair clean, skin healed, eyes alive. You stayed, she said simply. I smiled, rough and tired. You would have done the same for me. She nodded. No words were needed beyond that. The past had been conquered, the storm weathered. We had built something stronger than fear, stronger than loss. The valley was quiet now, but alive. We were alive. Together. And out here, in the wild, in the dust and the blood and the quiet, broken things could find a way to be whole. He survived the night, she faced her fears, and together they conquered the storm that haunted them both. But what about you? If you were in their place, would you have stood your ground and fought the same way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like if you enjoyed the story, and explore the other videos on screen for more tales of courage, survival, and unbreakable bonds.